So where we left off last time, we started to put in as for the home page the various types of posts based on the different categories that we had. So where we actually want to end up, at least with my website, would be something that looks kind of like this. Like, we have an area up here that would be like a slider that would have like the latest news, and then I have 3 different columns here, like, for features, for editorials, for events. In my posts, I have a lot of different posts here. Each one has a different category on them. So I have categories for editorial, features, latest news, and events here. And those can be set up in the dashboard under categories. So under categories, like, we have these various categories set up. And then when I go to actually create a brand new post, I can go ahead and assign this post to one of these categories here on the right hand side. So
did you already talk about the categories? What categories are those? Yeah, I think it's in the video from last week. Okay.
So sorry, when you say what they're for, so for my design, like, I have a few different sections here. Like, I have this section here for latest news, a section here for features, like editorial and events.
So you're categorizing the right section?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm using the same categories just visually that I have here. I'm using the same kind of categories when it comes to under, like, the post and I'm using the same categories here. And that way, by assigning the post to the different categories here, in the code, I have the ability to separate them out. And so, like, these are going to be my latest news, and it's only going to pull the ones that are categorized under latest news. And these are going to be the featured posts, so it's only going to pull the ones that are specifically under that category for features. So this is where we left off last time, and in the code, we introduced, like, a little bit of PHP in order to kind of see, like, how this actually works. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you a slightly different way of doing what we did last week. So it's kind of a review, but also it's a slightly different method of doing it. And by using this different method, excuse me, we'll have a little bit better options when it comes to signifying exactly what actually we're asking for from the database. For example, right now we have this query post, and we have cat equals 3. So that cat equals 3, what it's doing is it's trying to pull the specific ID of this category. So cat equals 3. So if we go to latest news, this is has an ID of 3, and really the only way that we know that is by looking at the URL for this when we go to edit this, and we can see that in the actual URL it says tag ID equals 3. So while this isn't something that we necessarily have to edit a lot, it is kind of annoying trying to pull it at that from this complicated place. Also, if we take a look at this, right now it's just pulling all of the ones that we have labeled under latest news. And this one we have all of the ones we have labeled under featured, and all the ones we have labeled under editorial, and all the ones labeled under events. If we look at the goal of what we have here, right now I don't actually have a slider built in here, but I'm hoping to get into that today as well. But if we look at the goal of what I have here, we're actually only pulling the top 3, and for the features, the top 3 for the editorials, maybe like 5 or so for the events. But we want a few more options when it comes to what it is that we're pulling from the database, other than just the category And if we can set it up so that we can pull the category name rather than like the category ID, that would make things a little bit more clear in our code. Lastly, when it comes to the events, so we can assign, excuse me, so we can assign a date to any one of our posts. Where we have here on the right hand side where it says published on, this is the date of this particular post, and I can go ahead and click on edit, and I can make this date whatever I want. If I set it for a date in the future, like December 20th, then what's going to happen is instead of saying update here, it's going to say schedule, because this post won't actually publish until that particular date. So when it comes to events, obviously most of the events that we're going to have are going to be in the future. There's no point in like actually having events from the past. So in order to accomplish this, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. One, instead of using the date that comes with the post, there's a way that this is the date that actually comes with the post, and it's tied to when it's actually going to publish this particular post. There is a way that we can set it up so that we could have a second field here, like one that's just maybe called event date or something like that, that's different than from when it actually posts. Another way we can do it is that we can still use this as it is right now, where we have the where we're using the published date as a way of referencing when the actual event is, but we can set it up so that we can actually see the unpublished events, so we can see the things that are in the future. But this will again come down to having a few more options here when it comes to actually pulling up a specific query. So on the class website, under the latest week, I have a couple of links to what is called the WP query. This is the one from the developer, WordPress.org. The developer WordPress.org is awesome as a resource because it kind of gives you all the different options that you would ever want to use. However, it can sometimes be a little bit tough to read as a tutorial. So it works really great as a reference, but if you're trying to learn about it for the first time, it's again a little bit tougher to read as a tutorial. So I have a couple other links in here. One is from tutsplus.com and one is from Smashing Magazine, which talks a little bit more about the WP query. Again, definitely maybe start with these two just to kind of get a general sense of what the WP query is about. And then this one, again, is a really great resource when it comes to learning all the different options you would have with this. So, let's take a look at our code from last week. So, the first thing that we did last week was we set up an if-else statement to determine that, if we're on the home page or not. So if you remember, let me actually see if I can quickly and easily pull up. Okay. So if we take a look at what underscores the starter theme gives us, this is our page.php, and basically anything that we have in WordPress that is set up as a page. So all of these, right now I have about, I have contact, I have contact me, for some reason I have home. Anything that is registered as a page, not a post, but as a page, is going to run through this template that we have here for page.php. That I get from this resource. So by default, the page.php looks something like this. We have the link to the header file, as far as the header PHP. We have a link to the footer as well as the sidebar, even though I think we got rid of the sidebar thing pretty early on. But the main thing in this page.php is that we have the div and the main for the primary and the main section. And again, this is just something WordPress adds so that it's easy to distinguish, like, this main content section of the page. But the real power of the page comes in here, where we have this while loop. And this while loop is basically pulling the content for that particular page in this area. Now, the first thing that we did in our page.php is we set up an if and else statement. So the if else statement, let me shrink this down a little bit. We have this if statement here, and we have the else, which is down here. And we have the end if, which is down here. So we have if, else, and we have the end if right here. What this if statement is doing is it's checking to see if we're currently on the front page or the home page. If we're currently on the home page, then we're going to do all this stuff, which is collapsed right here. Otherwise, so we have the else. Otherwise, we're going to have this content here. And then we end this if-else statement with this end if right here. So whenever we have an if-else statement, once again, it can't do neither, and it has to do one of them. It can't do both. It can't do neither. It has to do one or the other. Inside this if statement, we have a question. That question is either going to be true or false. So it's either going to do whatever is right after the if, or it's going to do everything that's right outside the else. Or basically creating a fork in the road, so it's only going to do one thing or the other. Now, if it's not the home page or the front page, then we're using pretty much the same exact code that we have from the original. The only thing we took out was, like, as far as the comments, we took out a couple of spaces, but for the most part, this is just acting normally for a normal page. For our home page, then we want to do something a bit different. So this is where we have the if-else statement, where we have this fork in the road, where it's either going to show homepage content or it's going to show kind of normal content. And we threw in this bold, this is the front page, or this italics, this is not the front page, just as an easy way to distinguish one or the other. So if I take a look at my about page right now, I have in italics, this is not the front page. But when I take a look at my home page, in bold I have this is the front page. Both of these pages, even though they look dramatically different, both of these pages are all running through this page.php. It's just showing something very different based on the if and else statement here. So we mostly, like I said, the inside the else is for the most part the default functionality as far as displaying the page normally. So last week we were mostly working inside of this if it is the front page section. So if it is the front page, let's take a look at this div where we have the ID latest post. So this div with latest post, this is pretty much everything. If I take a look at the inspect element, this div with the ID latest post is right now containing where we have latest news and where we have these individual posts here. Each one has a class as far as latest post. But this div as far as latest post is just dealing with this one section. And eventually it's going to be just this one section up here. We're going to have a div with the ID featured posts. That div with the ID featured posts has this H2 for featured, and it's basically just going to deal with this content which is here at the bottom left. Same thing with editorial, same thing with events. In our page PHP, we're mostly breaking the homepage up into these 4 different sections. So within these 4 different sections, we can worry about the code that just has to do with pulling those posts. So inside of latest news, inside of the latest post here, again we have this H2 tag, but the main power of this is what we have right here. So the first thing we're doing is we are querying the posts. Query posts is just one way that we can tell WordPress to pull some information from the database. So in the database, the database contains all of these posts. You know, it has all these posts non-discriminately, but it has this extra information tied into each one. Things like the date, things like the author, things like the categories, the tags. All of this information is in the database, kind of mostly within like one table in the database. So when we put it in this query post, we have to be more specific than just saying we want all the posts. So within these parentheses up here, we're specifying exactly what kind of posts we're looking for. So in this particular case, we're looking specifically for the ones that have the category with the ID 3. Once we have this line here, where it pulls the latest posts, then we have what's called the WordPress loop. So the WordPress loop, we start off with this if statement here. We have if have posts, and that's ending where we have this end if. We start off with this end if statement because we don't want it to run this loop if we don't actually have any posts. For whatever reason, if we made a mistake in the back end and we don't have anything under category 3, then we don't want to get an error or any sort of broken pages like on our home page. So we have this if statement in here so that it will only run this loop if we actually have posts under this category. So the while is the actual loop part. The while is the thing that's running over and over and over and over again. And basically it's saying while we have posts, so for every single one of the posts that we actually have, it's going to do everything that's inside of this loop here. So when it comes to PHP, it can be kind of confusing when we're looking at brand new code here and trying to distinguish between the PHP code that is new to us. But we do know that whenever we have the angle bracket and question mark, and we end with the question mark and angle bracket, like this here is PHP code, this here is PHP code, this here is PHP code, where we have this angle bracket and question mark. as much as possible, we try to kind of use, the HTML that we know in place of, so that, we can know, like, oh, we have a div, we have a class, we have an image tag here with an SRC. So we have a lot of familiar code in here intermixed with the PHP code. So it's running this loop over and over again. We have a div which is containing what we're calling a latest post. Again, if we take a look at the inspect element for this page, we can see that under latest posts, this is the div with the ID latest post. Under latest post, under the H2, we have div here. So we have a bunch of divs with that class, latest post here. So we know this is running this loop over and over and over again. For each latest post, we have a div that contains an image tag and a div that contains the title. So with the image tag, we have the image tag as we know, and the SRC is pulling the thumbnail URL for this specific post. Inside the title, it's pulling the title for this specific post. So wherever we don't see PHP code, like we don't see PHP code here, we don't see PHP code here, that's going to just simply repeat for every single instance of this post. But where we do see PHP, then that is pulling something very specific from this post. So it might be pulling the thumbnail, it might be pulling the title, it might be pulling the date, it might be pulling the author, various things which would be specific to that one post. Where we're using PHP, it's pulling that specific information. Now, like I said, we want to do this a little bit differently so that we can put in more parameters and more specification into this query that we have up here. Oh, one last thing before I move on. So this was the latest news, and pretty much we copied and pasted the entire thing for the featured posts and the editorial and the events. The only difference is we changed it up as far as what the category was. So we changed up as far as what the category was. We changed maybe a little bit with the IDs and the classes, but for the most part, it's the exact same code from section to section. Yes?
I missed where you got the category from.
So right now, like I said, we're going to find a slightly simpler way of doing this. But right now, where we have the category equals 4, or the category equals 3, if you go into the categories, there might be a simpler way of doing this, but I haven't found it. We can see the categories listed here as far as editorial, events, and featured. However, where I'm getting that ID from is if you actually click to edit one of these, in the URL for this particular one, it has in here, like this is the URL spelled out here. We have tag underscore ID equals, and that is the ID that we're actually looking for. So in this particular case, this is for editorial. It's actually 5, if you can see it up there.
Yeah.
For events, if we click on edit, this particular one is 6, is where it's getting that number from.
So even though it says category and tag underscore ID, it's tag, and whatever the number is.
Yeah, they really should put it just in this list here. But like I said, there is a way to do it based off of the name, which is what we're going to be getting into in a minute. I wanted to show you this way because the code is a little bit simpler than what I'm going to be showing you today. So I wanted to show you this slightly simpler way first, even though it does use an ID.
Okay.
So yeah, for the featured and editorials, they're pretty much exactly the same, except for we changed the category up. But again, we can change these IDs, we can change these classes up so that it fits more to what we have for those particular sections. The only other difference is for the events. For the events, we didn't pull a thumbnail, we pulled a date. So where we did have a thumbnail here, we pulled in the date, and this was the way that we pulled in that date from this particular post, was with this PHP code here. Again, the PHP code is pulling information from that specific post. Anything else outside of PHP code is something that's getting repeated over and over again. But it's something that's not unique to the post. Anyway, so query posts, we want to change this up a little bit so that it's going to give us more options in the future. If we go to let's go to the class website, and I'm going to click on the one that's the reference for WP query. Again, you can kind of read through some of this to get a little bit of a better sense, but I would also recommend the other tutorials that I linked up there. We'll see that the usage, as far as how we actually use this, we have standard loop here. I actually recommend looking at this one, which is the standard loop alternate. So in this one, we start off with a variable. If you remember in JavaScript, when we start off a brand new variable, we have var and then the variable name. In PHP, we start off with a $, almost a little bit like jQuery. But we start off with, sorry, I'm trying to find a good zoom here. We start off with a $, and then the variable name. In this particular case, they call it the query. We're actually going to be slightly more specific because we're going to have a bunch of different queries. But we have a variable which is the query, and we're setting it equal to WP underscore query, and then it has args in here. Now, args is short for arguments. Args is something that they made up that they would ideally be something that you set up before this line, but if the variable is slightly confusing, you can actually put the arguments right inside of these parentheses, or you can have them outside of the parentheses and just have them reference here. But we'll get to that in a minute. After this line where we set up the query to begin with, and this args, again, is the arguments, it's basically where we put in the filters or the specifications as far as what kind of posts we actually want. This is where we put in the categories. This is where we put in the number of different posts we want. This is where we would specify whether or not we want published posts or non-published posts, or posts after or before a certain date. These arguments here is, again, where we would actually specify that. After that, then a lot of this code would probably look pretty similar, or pretty familiar. So we have an if statement here where it's checking half posts. Again, very similar to what we have here, where we have if half posts. We're checking to see if we have any posts. If we have some posts, then we're going to run this loop, which is down here. And they even have an else after the half posts, so that if we don't have any posts, then we at least get some sort of message here that says something to the extent of, oh, there are no posts right now for this post, actually. But we have an if statement, which is checking to see if we have the posts. Then we're running the while loop. And just like with the while loop that we have in our page.php, where we're saying while have posts, we're pretty much doing the same kind of thing here. We just have the variable right before the have post in the if statement, and right before the have post in the while loop.
So in setting up the query, do you have to have, so you have your left bracket question mark PHP, do you have to have that / the query, or is that just a comment?
Yeah, so
that's a comment.
This right here is a comment,
Okay.
the / is the query. That's a PHP way of doing a comment. This right here where it says pagination here, this is an HTML comment. This is an HTML comment, this is an HTML comment here, same thing here. And really, what it's talking about as far as pagination is not something that we necessarily need for this particular instance. So we completely ignore that. They also have a slightly more complicated way of writing out an error message than we would typically do it. But yeah. Again, the basic structure of this is going to be similar to what we have set up. So yeah, let's start from a blank slate here. So right now I'm in the div as far as latest posts. This is outside of what I'm doing for featured posts or editorial and things like that. I'm just dealing with the div latest post here. So just like here, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to have a variable. I'm going to assign it to new WP query and then args. So I'm going to make sure this goes inside of PHP. So I'm going to do angle bracket question mark PHP to begin with. And then I'm going to end with question mark angle bracket. And then everything that goes inside of here is PHP code. So I'm going to start off with just using exactly what they have on the on the reference website. The main difference is main difference is where I have the query. I'm going to call it something a bit more specific because we're going to be doing this 4 different times on this page. So instead of calling it the query, I'm going to call it latest news query. This will also help to show exactly where this variable is being used in other places. Now I'm going to get back to this args in a minute, but let's get back to the overall template. So we have if, and then we would have the query, and then we have like the half post part here. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do question mark PHP, and then we have if. In this particular case, I'm going to use my variable name instead of the one they had in the reference. Latest news query, and then it's going to be hyphen right angle bracket, and then have underscore posts with a double parentheses. So this right here is again basically just the PHP way of telling WordPress to make sure that we actually have posts under this specification. So again, we're specifying it here with the args, but this if statement is basically just asking to make sure that we actually have some posts under this argument. After the parentheses, I'm going to put in a colon, and then let's go ahead and end that off. Before we go too much further as far as what is actually in this if statement, let's do it the same way that they have it on this reference website, where we have an else and we have an end if for this if statement here. So I'm going to put in else, and I'm going to put in end if. So,
those dots in or brackets doing that?
oh, these dots here. Oh yeah, brackets is doing that. I have
You have
a
a space that puts a dot in.
yeah, I have a extension on here, which is this is a show white space thing,
Okay.
where basically it just puts in some kind of character, just so I can see that a little bit easier. It's it can sometimes be a little bit handy.
Where did you put it?
So actually, I think I'm almost sure I did it as an extension. So you might have to go to Extensions Manager. Yeah, so it is an extension. So under the Extensions Manager, if you search for show white space, oh, they actually have a few different options here. I just go with the last one. It gives you an option to again have that in there. So yeah. So again, we have this if-else statement. The if-else statement is again creating a fork in the road for what's going on here. We have if we have post, then we're going to run the loop. If we don't have post, then it's going to do what's inside this else. Now, I often like to have with my if and else statements, I often like to have a PHP comment in here. Again, this PHP comment is completely arbitrary. You don't have to have it. It's completely optional, I should say. And I like to put in this first, / and a copy of the if statement, just so that if I have a whole bunch of code, I know exactly what this is. If it helps, I mean, you don't have to write in code here. You can write in more of a description, like if there are no posts, do the following. Comments are completely up to you. This is end of checking if there are posts. But yeah, it can sometimes be helpful, again, if we have more and more code. So yeah, if we have some posts, then we're going to do some stuff in here. If we don't, then let's put in some sort of message that says, and again, I'm going to simplify like what they have here. And I'm basically just going to put in a bold tag that says there are no posts here for now.
So why did they have like some PHP things?
So what this is doing, we have PHP escape HTML-E. This is either running through escape HTML makes me think that it might just be doing some sort of a filtering on this. To be honest, I don't remember offhand. This one says, oh yeah, so it is doing the translation thing here. Yeah, there's ways that you can set up your website so that it can automatically do some translations as far as translating to, you know, Spanish, Italian, German, whatever it is. And if you encapsulate wherever you have like message code, like messages like to the visitors, if you encapsulate it in certain functions like this, then what that's going to happen is it's going to basically take what you have here in English, and it's going to translate it automatically into the various other languages. But there's other things you have to set. It's not just kind of a one and done thing. There's other things you have to kind of set up in order for this to actually be helpful. It's just that in this WordPress reference, they like to have this kind of thing a lot, so that if you do have those translation plugins set up, then it will do that for you. But yeah. But basically, I'm just using code that we're a little more familiar with. Nothing like PHP here, just like a simple bold tag here. We could, of course, wrap this inside of a div, put IDs or classes on it, whatever we really want to do. Again, outside of these PHP containers, we can put in whatever HTML is familiar with to us. So we have inside of latest posts, we have it's getting a query. We have an if statement and an else and an end if, so that if we actually have posts, it's going to do whatever we have inside of here. If we do not, it's going to just put out this message here. Inside this if statement, we're going to put in the code for the loop. So we're going to have question mark PHP, and we're going to do pretty much going to do a very similar to what it has here for this while loop. So this is the beginning of the while loop, so that it knows like to run through this loop every single time that it encounters a post, and it'll stop as soon as it stops having a post. But the end of this while loop is where we have this end while here. So this is the beginning of the loop, this is the end of the loop. Whatever we put inside of here is the thing that's actually going to run over and over and over again for all the posts that we currently have. So this is where we put in any HTML code that we want to repeat over and over again for each post. Now, once again, I actually renamed this variable they have here where it says the query. So I'm going to change this to latest news query have posts, and then latest news query the post. So I'll show you this all in one line before I zoom back out. But all of this is pretty much on one line here, where we have the beginning PHP and the ending PHP here.
What is the second half of that PHP right here?
You're saying right here?
Yeah.
So we have this while loop here. The beginning of the while loop is technically right here, where we're saying while we have posts inside this query, inside this question, inside this, basically it's kind of like a question the database. While we have posts, then it's going to run this loop. So here, it's pulling the specific posts. So if I take a look at our list of posts in our dashboard for a second, I can actually filter the posts here by just going under all categories, and I can say latest news here and filter. All right. So this pulls up 5 different posts. So just by doing that inside the dashboard, where I pull up the category and I say latest, as far as the category is latest news, then that's essentially doing this beginning part here, where we have this query, and it's based off of a specific category that we're going to specify where it has ours here. But in order to isolate, so it's basically running a while loop. It's going to go through each and every one of these posts. But to get the information for that specific post, like if I'm trying to get the information for latest one title, then we need this line. Then we need this line here, which is grabbing that specific post. So this while loop is basically just saying, I want you to go through all the posts, and this is grabbing that actual specific post, so that we can use that content down here. Okay. So I'm gonna want some more complicated HTML code here. But for right now, let's go ahead and just simply create a div. Let's give it a class, and we'll call it latest posts. Inside that div, I'm going to put in, let's just put in a div. Okay. We're going to keep this really simple, just because we're going to change it in a minute. I'm going to have 2 divs inside of latest post. So for every single post, we're going to have one group under the div and class latest post. Inside that group of latest posts, I'm going to put in what I had for the thumbnail URL, which is the _ post _ thumbnail _ URL. And I'm also going to have, as far as the title, which is just simply the _ title. Okay. So we have our latest post div, which is the big group. We have the h2 tag, which is just the title of it. We have the query, where we're asking for from the database based off of a specific category. After that, we're creating this fork in the road with the else statement, where we're saying if we have some posts, is that right? Should that be plural? Hang on one second. Yeah, I thought so. If we have posts, then we're going to do this. Otherwise, we're going to output this message. So the if statement, if we do have posts, we're going to run this while loop. So again, this is the beginning of the while loop. This is the end of the while loop. So this is the thing that's repeating over and over and over again for each post. So for each post, it's going to create a grouping with this div called latest post. And inside that group, it's going to have a thumbnail, URL, as well as the title for each one. Now, as it is right now, this isn't going to work quite yet because we're missing just one last thing. So here where we have args, right now this is a variable. Again, PHP starts all variables off with this $. So this is where we're setting up this variable for latest news query. That's something that I made up. We can change it to whatever we want as long as we're consistent throughout. So we have this $, and we have this variable name, latest news query. We have this $, and the variable name args. Now, we didn't set up args anywhere quite yet. That's because, again, there's two ways of doing this, and you can kind of choose whichever way makes more sense for you. So, one way of doing this is where we're using this variable, args. Right before this PHP statement, I'm going to write some PHP code. Now, this is the beginning of our PHP code, and this is the end of our PHP code. It doesn't matter the fact that we have it on two different lines, even though typically that's the way that we set this up. So this whole thing is on one line. It doesn't matter if it's on multiple lines. It doesn't matter if there's HTML code that's outside of that PHP code. It's just that when it comes to the browser's understanding as far as what's going on, it knows that this is where I need to start reading PHP code, this is where I need to stop reading PHP code. Anyway, so when it comes to args, if we're using this this variable here, in fact, I probably have a reference to it on this page. Yeah. So, they gotta have a simpler one. Okay. See, that's the problem with this. It's just they only have really complicated examples here. Anyway. At the end of the day, args needs to be equal to an array. And inside that array, we're going to reference the filters that we want to change, or want to use. For example, the filter that we want in this particular case is we want to specify the category that we want. The category that we want is called latest news. And we're actually going to use the slug instead of the actual name. In WordPress, it very often uses this term slug as a way of saying, well, this is kind of the computer way of reading this. We have it in all lowercase, we don't have any spaces, so we have dashes instead of that. You'll notice that wherever we have a slug, it's a much simpler version of that thing. So if I create a category that was like peas and carrots, and I use an apostrophe for carrots and things like that. If I go to actually save this, well, yeah, it's going to have that name there, peas and carrots with an apostrophe s. But the computer version of this, like the slug or the basically the simplified version of this does not have an ampersand, does not have any spaces, it just uses a dash in that place. It does not have a apostrophe. It just takes the apostrophe out altogether. So it's a much simplified version of this, but it's still a little bit easier to read for humans. So for latest news, I'm looking at the slug, which in this case is latest news. And that'll be at least a little bit simpler to try to figure out the ID of this. So we have latest news, and inside this array, we're going to specify category underscore name, and then it's equals angle bracket, and then the name that we actually want. Yes. Okay. So we have args here. What we have for WP query, what it's looking for right here is an array. Now, one way we can do this is we can have a separate variable for our arguments that's going to include that array. Okay. So this is option 1. Another way we can do this is if instead of specifying the separate variable, we can put this array directly inside of these parentheses, in which case we don't need a separate variable altogether. So these two, option 1 and option 2, will do the exact same thing. One is using a variable outside of the WP query where we're specifying the array here. The other one is just putting that exact same thing inside of these parentheses in place of that variable. Now, another way of looking at this, which is kind of the reason why a lot of people like to do the argument outside of the WP query, is that sometimes this can get a little bit complicated. If we only have one filter that we're talking about right now, like we just simply want to do the category name, then that's fine. But if we want to have more than that, if we're trying to determine more than one thing, a lot of times what you'll see is, and again, you kind of see this with the reference website, that this args thing can get a little bit complicated depending on what it is that you're actually trying to pull. I'm trying to think of another practical one. What is per page? Yeah. So we have this other one called post per page, which will basically limit how many we are currently pulling. So if we're not only pulling category name, but also latest news, we can put in a comma after this, and then we're going to put in post per page inside of quotes, equals, angle bracket, and then the number of ones that we actually want. So let's say 3, that we only want to pull 3. So we have option 1 where we're just simply using args inside the WP query, and then we have the argument set up as a separate variable here. Option 2 is we have the array just directly in here. We're using slightly less code, and you know, it's up to you kind of what makes more sense to you between option 1 and option 2, because these two are doing the exact same thing. It's just a slightly different arrangement of the code. Option 3 is a bit more practical if we're having several different filters within this array. However, I should title these differently, because we could also still do this all inside the same parentheses by just simply having this exact same array in here. The only difference is we can't put it on multiple lines here, at least as far as I'm aware. You'd have to kind of make sure everything's on the same line if you were to do it this way. So this is technically kind of an option 4. So with option 3 and option 4, again, these two are doing the exact same thing. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to specify your arguments outside of these parentheses in its own variable. or you kind of want to put everything inside the same line. But they're all kind of doing the same thing. You'll find that a lot of people like to do it this way, even if they only have one. A lot of people like to do it this way just because it's slightly cleaner, and some people find it a little bit easier to read. But some people like to do the option that has less code, and where you don't have to come up with a different variable name for every little thing. So some people like to do it where you have less code and you just have it all within one line. It just gets a little bit crazy if you have a lot of different filters. And again, the reference website gives you a bunch of different options. Where under ARGs, you have a lot of different options you can do for that.
I don't really understand the difference between option 1 and queries, or the difference between option 2 and 4.
So option 1 and option 3, I should have labeled these a little bit differently. This is more like A1 and A2. And this is more like B1 and B2, just in the sense that both of these, as far as B1 and B2, are doing the same thing, and A1 and A2 are doing the same thing. But really, what we have between A and B is kind of a little bit different, because what we have for A1 in this particular case is just looking for the category name latest news. What we have for B here is actually looking for the category name latest news, but it's also specifying that we only want 3 posts. We don't want any more than 3.
So like they're the same as the array have more specification.
Yeah. And again, the reference website will kind of give you, this is a pretty long page. This is giving you really every little thing about posts that you could possibly ever need to reference about any particular post. So as far as like different ways of referencing the author, different ways of referencing the dates, things like that. You can specify all those different things inside of this arguments array. Whether you want to do that in a separate variable or whether you want to do that all in the same line. At the end of the day, it's looking for an array that will have all that information in there. So why don't we do it this way, where we have option B1. That way, whether or not we are just looking for one thing or we're looking for multiple things, it's just a little bit easier to read. So I have latest news query, and it's equal to new WP query, and then we're referencing arguments outside of this. So we have args up here, and again we have an array. It's looking for latest news, and yeah, let's keep it the same. So post per page, we're only looking for 3 of them.
So when you do this PHP code for, say, the featured page, are you supposed to use a variable and an arg?
That's a good question. We can probably use the same variable in that case. It doesn't hurt to use a different one.
Because arg is referencing the latest news.
Yes. So the thing is, if we're to do this for the feature, if we wanted to use the same thing for args, that should be fine, because we're going to specify it equal to a different value. So it's kind of like, if you can think of, we have a variable just simply called x, and we set x equals to 5, and then we're trying to figure out like what y is, and like we say y is equal to x plus x. Well, we know at this point, because x is equal to 5, then y is going to be equal to 10. But later on, if I simply say x is equal to 7, and then once again I do y is equal to x plus x, then at this point x is equal to 7. So even though I have the same kind of thing referencing x in both these cases, I've redefined x here So now this is 7 plus 7 instead of 5 plus 5.
Redefine the variable to that element.
Exactly. So I could potentially use the same thing for args. It doesn't hurt to use a different variable each time. I think it does matter here where we're specifying the query, because I think if we try to use the same variable here, it might potentially get confused. That's why, well, it's one of the reasons why. If you take a look at the reference website, where it has multiple loops, it does definitely use a different variable than here. It calls it query 1 and query 2. But yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, it doesn't hurt to change it, but I don't think it hurts to keep the same in this particular case. So we have the arguments. The arguments are going inside the query. Again, this is questioning the database to pull very specific posts. Posts that are just based off this category, and we're only pulling a certain number of posts. If we do not have posts per page here, then it's going to be unlimited number of posts in this category. So as soon as we put in posts per page, then that should only pull in 3 of them. We have our if statement here, which is check to make sure we have the posts. As long as we do, we're going to run this while statement. This while statement is going to run this HTML code over and over and over again, which is pulling the thumbnail and it's pulling the title. So far I've only made the change to latest news, but let's take a look at this. Probably not going to notice much of a change here, assuming this works. Yeah. So we have latest news. We have these boxes. We set up these boxes in a little bit of CSS last week. But you'll notice that as far as the boxes, we have a link to, or I'm sorry, the URL of the image, and we have the title here. So we have this running for 3 posts here. And if we take a look at the inspect element, this is our latest post. This is the big group that has both the header in it, as well as these individual divs. So we have this div latest post, latest post, latest post. Even though we only have that once in our PHP, we know that it's running this code 3 different times. Inside of this div with the class latest post, we have 2 different divs. One which just simply has the URL for the image in it, and one which has the title in it. So we can see all 3 of these latest posts are using that exact same format. So again, the reason why it's pulling 3 instead of the unlimited is just simply due to where we have a post per page and we have a 3 here. And again, it knows to pull the specific categories because we have latest news here. If we didn't have that category, then it's still going to pull 3 posts here. But as you can see from the titles, it's pulling any 3 posts. It doesn't care what category it is, but it's pulling definitely 3 posts. If we have the latest news in there, but we don't have posts per page, then yes, it definitely is pulling latest, but again, it's going to pull an infinite number of posts for this, at least I think it's infinite. Hang on a second. So on this reference website, in addition to telling you all the different properties, it'll also even tell you what the default is under this. So right now, it's actually telling me that the default, yeah, I think it's saying the default is -1, which is basically a way of saying that there is no limit on it. So that's where it's getting that from. I wasn't sure if it was yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so yes, the category name allows us to pull a specific category without getting into all that ID nonsense. And we have posts per page, which is limiting how many posts we're actually using here. Any questions on this before I move on to the other ones?
Do you set up, like, do you go into WordPress and just prepare everything before you even get
Oh, yeah, sorry. So yes, at some point I did, and even between last class and this one, I added just a whole bunch of posts here, which is, I mean, it's up to you whether or not you want to start off with fake information just to kind of do things quickly, or you could spend some time, even before getting into the PHP, you could spend some time putting in like the real code in here, the real like information. I just put in a bunch of fake information and latest one title, latest two title, just so I can kind of see exactly what it is. Yeah.
Information on it, like what I did in the national and
Yeah.
stuff of featured story for the most popular stories, which is laid out like your little headlines with the image.
Yeah.
and everything.
But whether you're putting in fake information or the real information, yes, it is helpful to have that information in there.
Okay.
It's actually created as posts through the dashboard before getting too far into the PHP stuff.
So you create the posts, the categories, and the pages should match like homepage and article page. But I think just automatically do a home and privacy.
So as far as pages, and again, there's multiple ways of setting up a WordPress website, but what okay. So what this would link to, and what each of these would link to, and what each of these would link to, and what each of these would link to, I wouldn't call pages in the WordPress. I would call all of these posts. So this is a post, this is a post, this is a post. All of these are going to be posts within WordPress. And each one's going to have its own title, its own photo. As far as the events, well, I mean, all of them have dates anyway, but the dates and events are going to be extra important. So I'm calling all of these posts. So in this particular website, I would actually have very few. I have very few things that are under the category pages, like maybe an about or contact, things like that. But pretty much all the articles that people are actually reading are going to be under the post section.
But I should set up pages to match my HTML, like article and home.
So for your static, what we did was we created a home page as well as an article page. So the home page is going to be a page in WordPress. The article one that you guys did, that's going to be a post. That's just a way of, because that's the template that's going to be used over and over again for every single one of your posts.
So when I go to that pages page, like it just looks like WordPress automatically added stuff. Right?
Yeah, I think WordPress automatically adds in like a privacy policy page or
So I
like
can
a sample
get
page.
rid of it.
Yeah, you can get rid of it. Really, the only one that you need, at least for this class, the only thing that you absolutely need is a home page. You don't actually need any other kinds of pages because all of your articles are going to be posts. So you created one static HTML, it's terminology. You created one static HTML page that you're calling an article template page. But that is actually going to be, as far as WordPress terminology, that's going to be a post, and we're going to use that same template for all of our articles.
So when you click on the menu for featured or events, what would it take you to?
So right now, those aren't actually linked up right now.
But would you do a page with the posts on it?
Yes, so ideally that would be,
So like the menu items should be,
sorry?
should the menu items be pages?
I mean, they can be. But there's another way of setting those up so that you don't have to do too much extra work. So that basically, if I clicked on latest, I mean, I didn't really actually create a template for this, but if I clicked on latest, then it would basically be only a list of the latest posts or only a list of the feature posts. There's a couple of different ways of setting it up. Okay. I wasn't going to get into this yet, but just to kind of show you, if we go into posts and categories, so you'll see that with each of these, if I go into edit, this is how I can edit like the actual title for this particular category. However, I can go into view, under editorial, I can go into view, and this is bringing me to a page that has all of the editorial posts on it. And it has like the title, it has the date on it, it has the photo on it, it has the actual content on it. But if I go to view on any one of these, it's going to bring me to a page that has all of those posts on it. So this is a category of events, and I can have this one. So what I can do is I can set it up so that each of these links up here are going to go to this page. So if I click on events, it's going to go to this particular page. And because of the way WordPress sets this up, it kind of already has a page that's going to pull all the posts on it. Now, the next natural question would be like, well, that's great, but how do I customize this page? And we can do that. That's going to be under archive. So what we've been dealing with so far, the header.php is obviously everything that is involved with our navigation, everything that is like the beginning HTML code. Footer.php is all the ending HTML code, whether we actually have a footer or not, but it's every bit of HTML code which is at the end of our normal template. Page.php is what's controlling the template for everything that's considered a page in WordPress, whether it's the home page or any other kind of pages. That's what page.php is. One that we haven't really got into yet is single.php. I don't know why they don't call it posts. Anyway, single.php is the template for all of the posts. So we haven't actually dealt with that one yet, but if we want to customize the look of any of our article pages, this is where we do it inside single. So when you get to that point, I would, again, focus on your home page first. But eventually, the same way that we're making our WordPress homepage look like our static homepage, we're eventually going to use single.php as the template for our article pages. So what you guys did as far as the static article page, you're going to be putting a lot of that, most of that code inside of single.php. So
Right now you're working page.php.
yeah, page.php is what's controlling the template for our home page and any other extra pages that we would potentially have, like again, like contact, about, things like that. But all of our article pages are going to run through this template here, single.php. Now, the one that I just showed you, as far as like what happens when we click on view for many of these categories, and again, there's an easy way that we can set this up so that all of these header items are going to link to one of these category pages. If we want to customize this category page, then that is going to be archive.php. So archive.php is this particular template. So if we're fine the way this looks, then we can just keep it as it is. But if we're, picky designers, as we typically are, and we want to customize the way this looks, then we would go into this article PHP to customize how this looks. I really would prefer you really focus on your home page and your article pages first. But this can also be an option if you want to add some specification into this. I didn't have you guys create a static page for this, just because it's, I mean, it's not too bad the way it is. It gives the information, but
Maybe it automatically does that. Like it has that as a template running out.
yes. Again, in order to get to this page, though, at least for right now, the only way to get to this page is to go in through posts, categories, and if you take a look at one of these categories, this table here, it's telling you that this is the category name. It has the slug, but also telling me, okay, I have 3 under editorial. This is 6 under events, things like that. This is how many posts I have tagged under this particular category. If I don't have any, like for peas and carrots, then we're just going to have like a blank page. It says like nothing found. But assuming we have some posts under that category, if I go to view underneath the category name, then it's automatically going to have this what's called an archive page, which is going to basically just going to list the posts and just have that information in there. So
archive
we could-
is for like a static interior page.
sorry, say it one more
Like
time.
a static interior page or
So
like a contact us doesn't change.
yes, yeah. So pages under WordPress are things which are, I mean, it's really up to the developer to kind of really define what pages and posts actually are. I would say with this kind of website, we typically have very few pages. Like, you know, there's very few things on CNN.com which are not actually changing. Like, you know, again, they might have like some sort of, I mean, I would have a contact if I was on CNN, but they would have like maybe like a staff page or something like that, like something that rarely changes. But anything that's an article, which is like something which is like, you know, like they're putting out like lots and lots of articles, like that would be typically a post as far as like the way WordPress defines it. Now, the archive is kind of interchangeable with like what we're calling a category page. So when we take a look under posts and categories and we say view, this page that it's pulling up here is running through this article.php. I'm sorry, archive. I apologize. Archive. This is an archive page, and it's basically just listing the events as they are, or the posts under that category as they are. Okay. If you want, so we set this. There's a couple of different ways of doing this. In our header PHP, if you remember from a few weeks ago. Yeah. Basically, what we did was we copied the navigation from our static. So basically, this is going to /latest /features / blah, blah, blah. If I know, okay, this is how I get into the category for events, then I'm just going to take this URL, I'm going to copy that, and for events, I would just paste in that URL because I know WordPress already knows that that's going to a specific archive. So that's probably the easiest way of doing that. Technically, I don't need this beginning part here, but either way that we want to do it, the way that WordPress is defining this particular category page, at least the way that we've done this, we can just simply put in that literal exact URL in with this literal HTML code. There's no PHP going on there. We're just setting up anchor tags that are going to specific pages. Does that make sense? So, where we were with the page PHP, we set this up for latest news. And I'm just getting rid of some of these line breaks here. But as always, feel free to set up line breaks so that it kind of is readable to you and is easy to navigate. But we have as far as latest posts, we have a title in here. We have the arguments. It's using the arguments here with this WP query. We have the if and else statement, and inside the if we have the actual loop which is going on. Let's go ahead and copy 99% of this. So this ending div is ending off this latest post. In fact, if I was a really good programmer, I would actually put in an HTML comment that tells me this is ending off latest post. But I'm going to copy everything that's in between here. And for featured, let's start off by just pasting off everything. Again, this div is ending featured posts. And I'm pasting everything that I did above in here. So obviously I'm changing the title. Under the category name, I'm changing it to the slug of the category. Where did they get the name slug? I'll never know. But it's basically, if you're not using a really complicated category name, which again, feel free to use whatever name you want here. It's just that the slug is going to simplify it dramatically. Usually to lowercase, taking out any spaces or special characters. I'm going to have a featured here. Again, 3 is fine, but I know where to change this. If I wanted to have as far as 4 or 5 different posts under here, I would know where to change that for a featured. Now, again, with this query variable name, from what I understand, it is best to change this one, even if you don't change as far as the arguments variable name. It's my understanding that it is best to change this this query variable name. So we're going to change this to featured query. And pretty much wherever I have latest news query, I'm going to go ahead and change that to featured query. Now here, or have latest posts. This is inside the while loop. Maybe I want the latest post to look the same from section to section. Maybe I don't. If I want to reference the individual posts under featured differently than I want to for latest news, well, I can either reference the big category for that section, or I can use a different class for each one here, and I can say featured posts. So either featured post, the ID of the big category, or the class featured posts that I have here. The rest of this can pretty much remain the same. I'm still pulling in the thumbnail, still pulling in the title for each one, but let's take a look at that. So, I have the 3 of the latest news, the latest 5, 4, 3, and the latest of the featured posts, 5, 4, and 3. Cool. So I can do the same thing for the editorial and the events. We're going to do something a little bit different for events. I'm going to copy this. So for editorial, change this category name to editorial. Changing this variable name to editorial query, and I'm changing every reference to editorial query here. And under the class, let's call it editorial posts. And then we're doing, again, just about the same thing with events. but we're going to change up a couple of things here. Okay, so with our event posts, once again, we're changing the category. Did I say events plural or? Yes, events plural. Let's pretend we made a mistake here. Let's say we changed to event non-plural. Let's see what that ends up looking like. Once again, I'm changing the variable name, events query. And events posts. Okay. So again, let's say I made a mistake and I used a non-plural events instead of the correct thing, which is should be plural here. So we have the latest, we have the featured, and we have the editorial. Under events, it says there are no posts here for now. If you remember, where that text exists is right here under this else. If I really wanted to be specific, I could say there are no event posts here, there are no featured posts here, there are no latest postings here. But the reason why I'm saying there are no posts here is because this if statement is failing. It's only going to put in this else if this if statement is false. This if statement is asking, do we have posts under this category? So it's asking, do we have posts that meet these arguments? These arguments is trying to pull a category name and it's trying to pull post per page. If this post per page was 0, then we would also have no posts. I don't know why you'd ever do that, but this would also say we don't have any posts, and it would say there are no posts here. So if you're getting that, go ahead and double check the arguments and make sure the arguments are correct, particularly with the category name. Go ahead and double check the slug underneath that particular category to make sure it's spelled and capitalized and pluralized all this the correct way. So, once we fix that, then we actually have the events. Now, with the events, as we can see from the end goal here, first of all, we do have 5 different events here instead of 3. We can change that up. But we also have the dates in here instead of just simply the images. So, under the event posts, under the arguments for events, I can say that I want to change this to, I'm going to change this to 5. But also, instead of the thumb URL, I want to pull in the time. Now, the time is kind of tricky with WordPress. I'm going to pull up the article for it so you can kind of see. With the time for a particular post, it's going to pull the both the date and time that's actually it was actually posted. But within the parentheses for the time is the format that it is going to pull that particular date and time. So, believe it or not, there's a lot of different ways of referencing a specific point in time. So this is saying that if the end result, so if the end result, if the only thing we're trying to pull is the actual time, like where it says 10:36 p.m., then we need to do it this way, where it says G:, I space A. So G in this particular case is the 10, the I in this particular case is the 36, and the A in this particular case is the PM. If we want to pull 24-hour format, where it says like 1752, then we do a capital G:, I. So the capital G is the 17, and the 52 is the I here. If we're actually trying to pull in the day, like for example, December, completely spelled out, not abbreviated. December 2nd, comma, the year. That's a 4-digit year, and that's a 1-digit day. Then we do it this way: F space J, comma, space Y. Now, all of these seem completely arbitrary, which they kind of are, as far as like how it's actually referencing this. But the way do they have a link to it? They don't have a link to it. If you Google PHP date, again, unfortunately, this isn't a dating website for PHP programmers, but this will give you the complete reference for what all of those arbitrary letters mean in case of like what it's actually pulling. So you can get as specific as the difference between a capital F, which is going to pull in the month completely spelled out, or a capital M, which is the month of abbreviated. No one in their right mind has all this memorized, which is why it's a good idea to have this reference here. But yeah, so in our end goal here, we have the year spelled out. I'm sorry, the month spelled out, October, and we have a single-digit day. When I say a single-digit day, I'm referring to you can either have 1 through 31 or 0, 1 through 31. So basically, whether or not you want a leading 0 with a one that's less than 10. Anyway, so I'm going to be looking for a single-digit day, which is J, and the month, which is spelled out, which is a capital F. And this is all going inside of the underscore time, inside of parentheses, inside of quotes. So for events post, instead of the thumbnail URL, I'm going to say the underscore time, a set of parentheses here, and a set of quotations in here. And inside those quotations, I'm going to have capital F space J. Capital F is the month spelled out, and the J is the single digit day of the week. I'm sorry, not day of the week, day of the month. So it looks like I got lazy and specified most of these as November 20th. But if I specified, for example, let's do event 6, posts. I'm going to go into the category for events. Post event 6. I'm going to go to the quick edit, and I can go ahead and specify this as something else. 25. Now, when I do that, I set this to the 25th. Then it's immediately going to assume that I want this to publish in the future, which is under scheduled. If I go back to my home page and I refresh this, then event 6 goes away. By the way, we have 6 different events, which means that if we're only pulling 5, then I'm not seeing 1. Whereas we did see event 6 before, then we didn't see 2 because it's only pulling, or yeah. Anyway, it's only pulling 5, so that means that whichever one is not inside the year specification or the day and time specification is going to not count. Now, we specified event 6 for November 25th. And again, this makes sense for events. We want our events to be talking about events that are in the future. Naturally, whenever we're querying the post, naturally it's going to only pull posts which are published, posts which are current. So we need to specify in the query that we not only want current posts, but we also want posts that might be in the future. Just for events, not for anything else. So, I'm trying to remember the exact property for it. So what we're looking for here is post status. And it's telling us that by default, it's going to protect post status, which are called future, draft, and pending. So we want to pull post status, which are either naturally published or ones that are maybe in the future. It's kind of up to you. You might decide, like, well, say I don't have enough posts for the future. Maybe I want to show some of the past ones, or maybe no matter what, I only want to show future events. It's kind of up to you. We can see how it's specifying the post status here at these examples. This will only pull post status that are draft. By default, it's only going to pull post status that are published. So if that's what we want, we don't actually have to specify. But in this particular case, if we only want to pull posts which are draft status, which under the status for any of these posts, whether we're doing the quick edit or we're doing the normal edit, under status, right now it says scheduled for event 6. I get a drop down if I go to edit, where it says draft, pending review, scheduled. If it's sometime in the past, if it's sometime in the past, I'm going to have published instead of scheduled. But basically, I have several different options here: draft, pending review, published, scheduled, and those are all matched in this reference here. Publish, we have pending review, draft. Auto draft is basically when WordPress makes it a draft and you didn't make a draft yourself. Scheduled is the same thing as future. I don't know why they don't use the same term there, but future is the same thing as scheduled. You can set a post to private, post or a page to private. Trash, if you actually trash a post, you could show trash posts. I wouldn't recommend that. Now, if I don't want to worry about it, I could potentially use the NA, and then it's going to pull basically all of these at the same time. If I only specify one, like it has here, with post status draft, it's only going to pull draft ones. If I do post status like this, then it's going to pull pending, draft, and future ones. So I have a lot of different options here, whether or not I just want one, whether or not I do want all of them, whether or not I want only a couple. It's up to you as far as what kind of makes the most sense, yeah. Personally, I think that, well, let's do current and future ones, just so we can kind of see what that looks like. So if I want both current posts as well as future posts, then I'm going to use both publish as well as future. So I'm not going to use this example that only has one of them in here. I'm going to use this example, which has multiple in here, but I'm only going to use published and future. I'm not going to use that draft here, or pending. So I'm going to specify under, we'll put in an extra comma here. We have commas in between our different filters here, but not at the very end. So the commas are only in between. So I'm going to put an extra comma here. I'm going to have posts underscore status. And then equals angle bracket. And just like it has here, instead of simply saying post status equals angle bracket draft, I'm going to say post status equals angle bracket, and then we're going to have the different ones we want inside an array, just like this. So instead of just one value here, like we have for events or posts per page, I have an array, which is basically a list of other values that we want here. So the values that I want are future and publish. Is it publish or published? Let's publish. So for the post status, I'm looking for both publish as well as future. And if I go ahead and save this, and I go ahead and refresh, oh, that's right. I changed the event back to the past. Let's go and change to the future. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So now it's showing us events from the future. It's also showing us events from the past. Now, if you disagree with me, if you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, I don't want to show stuff from the past, then basically what you're going to want is only future. And you can do it in one of two ways. You can either only simply say future here, or if you want to keep the array thing in there, just in case you decide to change your mind, you can do it this way. So you can either do it this way, or you can do it this way. Either way is perfectly fine. But if you only want future ones, then you can do it that way. And then it's only going to show ones that are scheduled, which is what's called a future. Any questions on that? Okay. So, last thing I want to go over today is mostly I've just been dealing with straight data so far. I just want to make sure that I'm able to see the time, and I'm just able to see the title, and I'm just able to simply see the thumbnail URL. But I haven't really been dealing with style very much. If I go into I'm going to open up my static template here. This is my static template where for latest news I have an H1. Oh, I have an H1 instead of an H2. But I have an H1 for latest news, and then I have a section for slides. I actually only have one slide in here so far. Let's get back to that one in a little bit. But I also have a section for the home content bottom. Home content bottom has the 3 sections for feature, editorial, and blah, blah, blah. But I can take a look at the HTML, which is repeating in my static HTML template. This is the part that I really want to focus in on, is this HTML, which I manually repeated in my static HTML. So I just copied the HTML code over and over again, and the only difference between them, I'm using the same class. Right now they're all going to the same href. The same classes here for the images, but really the only difference between the code that I'm repeating, and this is in my static HTML, is the image itself as well as the title. Now, if you're following along a few weeks ago, way back then, I did already copy over my CSS. So I have a separate CSS file called custom CSS, and I made sure that in my header PHP, it is definitely referencing that custom CSS file. So if I'm already pulling over all of my CSS for my static HTML, then as long as I'm using the same classes and the same general structure, I have these in A tags, I have these in divs, then I should be able to pull over the same static HTML into my WordPress. I'm just simply replacing the literal content, which is like the literal URL to the images and the literal titles here. So let's test that out. I'm going to get into the doing the slides in a minute, but let's go ahead and make sure that inside my content, I'm going to have home content latest. Let's do these side by side. That's going to make more sense. So here on the right is my static HTML. And here on the left is my page.php. I'll make these a little bit smaller. Okay. So here on the left I have my page PHP. Here's where I have my latest news. Here on the right I have my static HTML. For my static HTML, this is where I start my main content section for the latest news. So instead of this thing where I have latest post, let's replace that with that same ID. I had these as H1 tags instead of H2 tags. And this is a container for the slides, which right now I only have one slide, or I'm sorry, in my static I only have one slide. In my WordPress I actually have multiple, but I'm just not accommodating for that yet. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and put this div home content latest slides. This is something that I made up right after the H1 tag. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that ends right before I end home content last. So we'll make sure this is the ending div for this slides container. Now, the part that's repeating, which is this A tag for the different slides. Let's go ahead and make sure inside this while loop, I'm going to have this A tag. Inside the A tag, I'm going to have this div that's going to have the title. But I'm replacing the reference to the literal image here with this PHP thumbnail URL. And I'm replacing this literal title here with our PHP title. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our code that was there in the loop before. So now, inside the loop, I have an anchor tag that has the divs for the title, and the anchor tag is using the post thumbnail URL instead of the literal reference to the image, and it's also using the PHP title instead of, again, the written out one. Okay. So even though on my original one I really only have one slide in here, it is starting to look like that same end goal that we have here, as far as how it's treating the titles, how it's treating the overall background image for these slides. It's starting to look the same way. And it's due to the fact of two things. One, I made sure that we're using the same CSS from my static HTML. So we're definitely including the same CSS from my static HTML website, and I definitely made sure that in my header PHP that I'm linking to that CSS. Second, I'm making sure that the IDs and classes and references are all the same as my static HTML. So the same way that I set it up inside an anchor tag, the same way that I set up with these classes, even the same containers that I have here, I made sure that it's exactly the same as my static HTML. The only thing that is really different is where the PHP code comes in. So obviously, like this PHP code that is specified at the beginning of this loop, and all the code which is referencing the God bless you, the code that I'm actually looping over and over again. and the literal references to the content that's inside of that post. But other than that, my HTML is exactly the same. And then I can know that it should look just like my static HTML. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the features and the editorial. For right now, I'm going to set latest news to just 1. That way I don't have to worry about that. But we should be able to get into the slides in another minute. Okay, so here's where we have featured posts. First of all, I have all 3 of the columns at the bottom inside of a div called home content bottom. I'm going to make sure that ends right here, right after where I'm doing, oh, I'm sorry, not right there. This is the end for the front page thing. This is where inline post is actually ending. I'll make sure that ends right here. This is the end of home content bottom. Okay. So, inside of featured posts, I'm actually calling this home content features. And that's where this is ending. I'm using an H1 instead of an H2. And I'm calling this features instead of featured posts. But more importantly, we have right after the H1 that's specifying the title, I'm immediately going into the loop. So it's looping this anchor tag here. And this anchor tag is the container for the feature. Inside the container for the feature, which is this anchor tag, I have 2 different divs. One which is using the image as a background image, and one which is doing this for the title. So inside my while loop, instead of this container that I have for feature post, I'm using this anchor tag here. And I'm making sure instead of this ending div, I have an ending anchor tag. For the featured image and the title, which is going inside of this container, I'm going to use this div with these classes. And lastly, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm replacing the literal content as far as the URL image and the title with the PHP. That should pull that from that exact post. After I've done that, I can go ahead and get rid of this code that I had before for the HTML. And again, what I'm left with here is the same kind of loop that I have in my static HTML. So we have an anchor tag, which is surrounding 2 divs using those same classes here.
Can you read all of the slash?
So ideally, this would actually link to the actual post. So we can change that a little bit later, but right now this is going to just an empty area. But yes, I would actually link it to the post itself. Actually, yeah, let me show you that. Let me finish the editorial in the event section, but I'll show you that in just a minute. So, we did the features. So we have a slash in here. Technically what that slash is going to do, if we just have a slash inside of href, if we only have a slash, it's going to go back to the home page of the actual website. If we have a hash number sign in there, then what that's actually going to do is it's going to go to the top of the same page.
Okay.
Some people use either one as a placeholder for eventually putting in the URL. So whatever placeholder you want is perfectly fine. But technically that's what those two things actually will do. If you forget to actually put in the real URL. So that is for features. For editorials, editorials looks almost exactly the same. We have a container for the editorial section. We have an anchor tag with its own class, and that's going inside of the loop. And we're making sure this container is ending an anchor tag instead of a div. And we're using these two divs inside the editorials with these two classes. We're just simply replacing the thumbnail URL with what we have literally put in there. And the same thing for the title with what we literally have in there. And again, we're getting rid of the the other stuff that we had here. Now events is a little bit different. We do still have a container that we specified for events. Oh, I forgot to set these to H1s instead of H2s. Anyway. Okay. So with events, once again, I'm using an anchor tag as a container. And again, I'm using the anchor tag as a container instead of a div so that the entire thing can be clickable. And here we have a slightly different because we're talking about the two divs that are inside of this anchor tag are for a date and a title instead of just simply an image and a title. Now, it's helpful to have the images as background images, like I did for featured and editorial. It's helpful to have them as background images because they're easier to crop. However, if it makes more sense for your code, it helps because it's what you already have in your static HTML. If it helps to just simply do them as image tags, that's perfectly fine. But like I said, I find background images a little bit more versatile because, again, we can crop them a little bit easier in CSS. So that should be all the HTML that we have from our static. So let's take a look. Cool. So, except for the content itself being different, we can see that the actual layout looks just like we have for our end goal here. We have like the events, the editorial, and the features, all inside of their own columns. The features and editorial articles have like this square image for like the featured image, and it's just putting the title itself there on the right hand side of each one. And because I'm using anchor tags, the whole thing is would be clickable to that particular title. I'm sorry, that particular post. Where that URL is coming from is something called the permalink. Should be on here. Oh, actually, is it on the loop page? Yes. So this is the page that I linked to last week, in week 8, which is talking about the loop itself. And here, this is where we get information like, well, how do we pull up the title, or how do we pull up like the time and things like that, or the post URL. The permalink is the way that it specifies the link, the URL to that particular post. So right now, all of these are linking to just simply a slash. So it's just going to A, and as far as the href is just simply go to slash. which is the same thing as saying going to the homepage. Now we're already on the homepage, so it's not really actually going to do anything. But if we want to put in the actual link to that page, and we'll start with the featured. So right now where we have this slash, we're going to put in PHP code. So I'm going to do angle bracket question mark PHP, and I'm going to end it with a question mark and angle bracket. And the code that I'm going to put in here is the underscore permalink with the double parentheses there. So just like we have the title here, or the time, or the post thumbnail URL, we have the underscore permalink. And this is under featured. I'm going to go ahead and save that, refresh it. And we can see the anchor tags for each of these feature articles now. The href is going to a literal URL. If I go to posts and I go into any of my featured posts under all categories that are featured, filter that out. If I go to edit any one of these, this permalink is that's where it's actually pulling this from. I could potentially change that here. I could say this is a special post. I can click OK. And this doesn't affect the title. This doesn't affect any content that I have in here. It's only affecting the actual URL, which no one really pays attention to. But I can go ahead and change this for featured 5 title. And if we go back to this, under featured 5, again, this is a special post. It's going to be going to that no matter what, because it's trying to pull that from that specific post. By the way, you'll notice I put it in dashes instead of spaces. If I try to fake it, I say peas and carrots. WordPress is not going to have any of that. It's going to simplify, because it's really, you can't really do that in your URLs. So it's going to take out any spaces or special characters like ampersands or apostrophes and replace that with either a dash or nothing in the case of apostrophes. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I forgot about that. If we want to have the link to that post in there, we need to use the permalink in space of any of those hrefs. Now, the last thing that I wanted to go over was as far as the slideshow. You have to remind me, did we... And by we, I mean me and David. Have either of us talked about this BX slider as a possible jQuery plugin for doing a slideshow? Remember what it was called? I was just curious as far as which one you used. Oh.
Moving on.
I definitely used it.
I don't know.
Slide or slide?
Slide is the one that you showed, right? Or no?
I don't remember. There's a lot of jQuery plugins out there for basic slideshow. This is one that, in my opinion,
Slick is
Slick.
There it is.
Slick. Oh, okay.
That's
I'm trying to remember what Slick looked like.
no, it was BX slider, the one you showed me. I was having trouble with it, so I tried the Slick one, and I think it would work well with that.
The last carousel you will ever need. Whatever jQuery plugin you use, it doesn't really matter that much. But I highly recommend when it comes to investigating jQuery plugins, start off with the assumption that there's probably more than one that's out there that'll accomplish what it is that you're trying to do. So find one that's going to be the easiest for you to use. Try to find one that, like, as far as the code, makes most sense to you when you're looking at the demos, you're looking at the documentation. If you want like specific options that you've seen in other ones, just Google around, like look at the demos and find one that will actually meet your needs. Because like I said, there's a lot of different options out there. I particularly like the BX slider because it's relatively simple when it comes to just like right out of the box. You want to do something very simple. When it comes to doing some more complicated options, well, it can be a bit more complicated. But if you're just trying to do something quickly out of the box, it's good for that. It's also naturally responsive, so you don't have to add anything extra to make it responsive. But yeah. So, BX Slider. If you go to the bxslider.com, I have a link on the class website, but under examples, with any jQuery plugin that's out there, you want to take a look at some sort of basic usage guide. And every jQuery plugin author will call this something slightly different, whether it's like basics or getting started or beginner's guide or something like that. You always want to take a look at like, well, how can I use this right out of the box without much customization? So under BX Slider, it's under examples, and you can choose just the image gallery with captions, or you can choose the one that has auto show with the start and stop controls. Actually, I think there's another one. Hang on a second. I thought it had an even simpler guide. Oh, yeah. So, actually, under install, it has a slightly simpler guide, which will say it has two ways. It has the easy way or the other ways, as far as ways to kind of incorporate it in. Let's look at the easy way. So as far as the easy way, there are three things that we need in order to set this up. Okay, that's the 1, 2, 3 here. Oh wow, look at that. This is free on the internet. That's how crazy jQuery plugins are. Like, authors will just create these things for free and just allow people to have them for free. And even more than that, they actually spend time to actually document these things. Long story short, feel free to donate to people that are giving things out there. But anyway, so we need three different parts in order to actually make this work. One, we need links to the files that we need. With any jQuery plugin, all of them, we're going to need a link to the main jQuery library. So however we decide to put that in, we're going to need to make sure that we have a link to the main jQuery library for any jQuery plugin. In addition, we're going to need a link to a JS JavaScript file that's specific to this plugin. So we need a link to the main jQuery library, the main JS, and we also need a script tag that's linking to this specific one. Now, whether or not you decide to download that file yourself or you decide to link to a version of it online, typically I like to download the file myself, but let's do this a slightly quicker way, where we're linking to the one that's online. So every jQuery plugin that I've ever seen has at least 2 script files that are linked to. Now, this particular one also has a link to a CSS file. Some jQuery plugins do not require a CSS file that you get from the author, but some of them do. So this particular one, it's saying we need the main jQuery library, the link to this particular BX slider JavaScript file, as well as a link to a CSS file specific to this plugin. Second, I would actually reverse these, but second, we need a way of referencing what are the slides. So in this particular HTML, we see a div with the class slider, and inside of that we have a couple of divs here. I'm a slide, I'm another slide. So we have a div with some sort of identification for that div, whether it's an ID or a class. we have a container. And inside that container, we have individual slides. In this particular case, the slides are divs. In our case, we're going to use it. Well, in our case, we're actually going to use divs that are going to have other things in it. But the main thing that we need is some sort of container that has some sort of identification. And lastly, like I said, I would kind of reverse these two. But lastly, in our jQuery code, we're going to reference that container, and we're going to say .bxSlider off of that reference. And we can actually call this container whatever we want, just as long as we use that reference up here. And we're going to say .bxSlider off of that. So let's take a look to see how this would look with our code. So first of all, we're going to need these links to these files. And these naturally go inside of the head of our HTML. So our head is actually inside of header.php. So we might as well follow the same format. Let's go into this is our header.php. This is the head tag within our header.php. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste those links to in our header.php. Now, where to do this? Let's go ahead and do this after the WP head, but before our style sheets. Oh, okay. So actually, I'm already linking to the main jQuery library here, so that's fine. All right, hang on a second. I'm pasting those three things they had from bxSlider in the head of my HTML. Now, one thing I don't need is the link to the main jQuery library because I already have that. I already have that here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. Now, since I do have it down here, I want to make sure that the link to the bxSlider JavaScript file is going to go underneath that. So I'm going to cut and paste this script going to the bxSlider. I'm going to cut and paste it to right underneath. Right underneath the link to the main jQuery library. Now, I have this main link to the main jQuery library on my static HTML. If you do not, then you need to make sure that you incorporate that in. But we have a script that's going to the main jQuery library, and we have the script tag, which is going to specifically the bxSlider one. Lastly, we have the link that's going to the bxSlider CSS. Now, ideally, this should go before your custom CSS, because if it's going before your custom CSS, then that means you can customize it yourself in your own custom CSS. So, from bxSlider, we need these three tags: the two script tags and the link tag. We already have the link to the main jQuery library here, but in case you don't have it, make sure you include that in there. I have the script tag, which is going to the bxSlider JavaScript file here. And again, I could download this file myself and put it on my own host, which is usually what I do, but let's just do this slightly quicker so we have that in there. Lastly, we have the link to the bxSlider CSS. And ideally, I put that before my own custom CSS. But again, all of this is going after the WP head that is already in. That should have come with the header PHP if you downloaded the underscores starter thing. Okay. So we have that step one in there. And again, I'm reversing these two. What I'm calling step two is making sure that we have the HTML set up properly. And to make sure we have the HTML set up properly, the main thing is we just need a container for all the individual slides. So I'm going to go back to my page.php, and I'm going to look up here where we have the latest news. Here's my loop down here. My loop, I'm looping through a series of anchor tags. Inside that anchor tag, I have a div, which is including the text, but the anchor tag itself is the slide. Same way in BX Slider, we have these divs, which are the slides. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to use an anchor tag instead that's going to have some stuff inside of it. Oh, I forgot to do the program link thing here. Sorry. Okay. So anyway, I'm using the anchor tag as the actual slide, and it has the some stuff inside of it. So in order to make the BX Slider thing work, I need some sort of container for my slides. So I'm going to reference this guy, home content latest slides, as the container for the individual slides. So inside of home content latest slides, there's a bunch of PHP stuff here, but the main meat of the stuff inside home content latest slides is this anchor tag, which is looping over and over again, these individual slides here. So I do have the HTML already set up here. The only thing I need to definitely remember is this ID that I have for home content latest slides. In the example here, they're using a class, they're calling it slider. That's fine. We just need to kind of make sure we match it in our custom JavaScript here. Alright, so that was step 2. Step 3 is the custom JavaScript here. Now they already have the document ready function part. We've talked about that before, right? Document ready function? Mm-hmm. Right, okay. Just in case you don't remember, this part here, we have this beginning our custom JavaScript or jQuery, and we have this end, actually we have this, sorry, starting our custom JavaScript or jQuery, and we have this ending our custom JavaScript or jQuery. We need to make sure we start with this and we end with this if our JavaScript is at the beginning of our code, which is pretty common. We usually put our custom JavaScript inside the head. Some JavaScript programmers will put this stuff at the very end of the HTML, like right before the ending body tag. I mean, after everything, after footers, after closing divs, right before the ending body tag, sometimes people will put their custom JavaScript there. If you do the custom JavaScript right before the ending body tag, then you don't need this document ready function part. This document ready function part is saying to the browser, I want you to wait until the entire document is ready. I want you to make sure you load everything that's in the document before we do anything here. So if we have our code at the very beginning, then we absolutely need this because we need to make sure that it loads everything here so it knows all these references. If we have our custom JavaScript at the end, then we don't need this part because we've already loaded the entire HTML. I'm only explaining this so that, again, if you see this document ready, but sometimes you don't, you kind of know like why you sometimes don't see it and why you sometimes do. A big part of it just comes down to personal preferences by the programmer. Personal programmer preferences. I tend to like to have the script, the custom script, inside the head, which is why I always have the document ready function here. Some people don't like that extra code, so some people have it at the end. Anyway, document ready function. The main part of this last thing with BX Slider is this one line here, where we have slider BX Slider. It's referencing the container, and then it's putting .bx Slider on that. Now, if I go into the head of my header PHP, I have my header PHP and I have the head tag inside this header PHP. I already have a script and I already have document ready function. I already have all that because it's controlling my mobile button. But if you don't already have this stuff in here, then you know to include this stuff in your head. So for whatever reason you don't have this kind of thing, so you want to make sure that inside of the head of your header PHP, you have the script tag, and you have this document ready function, and that ends the whole thing here. Now, inside this document ready function, I can have a lot of different custom jQuery. This is just one part that's handling the mobile button. But when it comes to my slider, BX slider thing, I'm going to copy it straight from the website. I can put this before, I can put it after, it doesn't really matter, just as long as it's inside of this document ready function part. And again, this very end where we end off the curly brace, end off the parentheses, and we end off the semicolon. So I'm going to go ahead and put it, let's put it after. Now we have dot slider and we have BX slider. The only other thing we need to change is this part here. On the website for BX slider, this is referencing a div that has the class slider. That's the container that we're dealing with here, div with the class slider. In my HTML, I'm using a div with the ID home content latest slides. Who comes up with these long ID names? Oh, that's right, I do. So instead of a dot, I'm going to have a hash or number sign, just like we do with CSS. And instead of slider, I'm going to say home content latest slides. So, step 1, linking the script and the CSS. Step 2 is we make sure that we have some sort of container for whatever we're calling the slides. Whether we're using anchor tags for the slides, whether we're using divs for the slides, whether we're just using image tags for the slides, it doesn't really matter. The thing right outside of those slides, we need some sort of container that we can reference with an ID or a class.
You didn't add anything in step 2, right? We just pulled the ID.
Well, technically I'm reversing what they're calling step 2 and step 3, but
But because you already had the HTML written, you're just pulling the ID that you had written.
exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So we, the main part of the HTML is we just need some sort of container for the slides. Now, the slides do, by the way, the slides do need to be consistent. Like, I can't have an anchor tag for one slide, and then a div for another slide, and then a paragraph tag for another slide. It needs to be something consistent from slide to slide as far as the main container for that. But you probably already have something like that already. But whether it's a div, a paragraph, an anchor tag, or an image tag itself, obviously the simplest way of doing this slideshow is just simply an image tag. But yes, we have a container for that those slides, and then the last part is in our custom jQuery. We have a reference to that container, and off of that reference to that container, we're saying .bxliner. Now, again, whatever way you like to do the references, whether it's an ID or class, just like with CSS, we use a hash for an ID or a dot for a class. So you just want to be aware of that. So let's take a look. Looks good so far. I only have one of these in here. Did I forget? I thought I changed it back to 5. No, I didn't. So
you have highlighted the ID home content latest, and then the slides are under the headline. That's correct, right?
oh no, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. This is home content latest slides, and this is what actually holds the slides themselves. So home content latest is this and the H1. What I want to make sure my reference is, and this is a good thing to double check, yeah, So I want to make sure that the thing which is my container only contains slides. So you're right, I couldn't use this because it has the H1 in it, but I can use this because the only thing that's in here, if you ignore all this PHP for a minute, is the anchor tags themselves, which would be reviewed. Now the reason why I was only seeing one thing in here is because I forgot to change this post per page. I changed it to 1 just so it wouldn't repeat it before I have the slides in here. But let's change it back to 5. Let's change it to 4. We don't need to see more than 4 slides. One thing that's for some reason very hard to convince some clients of is that people don't visit websites and just simply stare at slideshows. 9 times out of 10, you don't need a slideshow to go past more than like 4 or 5, because people aren't gonna just like sit and wait for that. Anyway, so I'm just putting in 4 here, and yeah, looks like our slideshow's working. So we have little controls here, and I forget if it's actually automatic or not. But like I said, we like BX Slider because out of the box, it's pretty. It has like a lot of different functionality, functions in it. I've used other slideshows which are easier to customize, but there's less out of the box, if that makes sense. This one, there's more out of the box, but it's slightly harder to customize. There's one that I like a lot called Cycle 2.
That's the one we used for the landscape one.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm sure I've shown you this before, because this is one that I like a lot. Like I said, it's really easy to customize, but there's slightly less out of the box for this one. But anyway, so this is, and I want to be clear, like I'm not requiring you to specifically use BX Slider, I'm not requiring you to specifically use Cycle 2. It'd be nice if your website doesn't incorporate in some JavaScript or jQuery, but whenever you're dealing with any sort of jQuery plugins, first step is just research. Just look around to see what the options are. If you want to do a photo gallery with a lightbox kind of thing, there's lots of different options out there. So look at the demos that are on those websites.
What's the best way to
See.
search for a plugin?
Yeah, so the jQuery website, it does have a directory of plugins, but yeah, Google, I find Google just as efficient as this thing, because not everyone registers their plugins with this thing. Yeah. And just like with Theme Forest, there is Code Canyon. I'm sure I've talked about this at some point. Where you can get stock stuff. So Code Canyon, you can get stock a lot of different code things. Under JavaScript, you'll see. Yeah. So maybe these aren't specifically jQuery. Maybe they're what's typically called vanilla JavaScript. Oh, here we go. So you can actually filter it specifically by jQuery. And it's up to you. I mean, like, if you want to purchase something which is a little bit more professionally made, it's perfectly fine. But like I said, when it comes to any sort of jQuery plugins, like research around, like find one that, as far as like the demos, kind of looks what you're trying to go for. And again, even before you start to implement it, take a look at some of the documentation for it. So take a look at, and they all call them something different. Like they call this one API, and it talks about like how you would actually customize any of the options with this one. You can look at the various demos here. So see, number one, does it look kind of like what you want, or function kind of like what you want out of the box? If it doesn't, like, does it have pretty easy to understand customization options? If you're just getting started with out of the box, like, how does it work? Like, does it kind of make sense to you? Definitely research a plugin before going through the hassle of Yeah, exactly. Sorry. Um, but yeah. So, we have our homepage looking pretty close to our original design. And again, a big part of that is just making sure we're using the same CSS and the same like containers, things like that we have for the HTML. As you can see, a lot of this is just a matter of weaving some PHP in and out of code that we understand. So this is why it's important to start off with a static, as far as this process that we went through. Start off with a static HTML with all the code and stuff that we already understand of how to actually do. We get it working like pretty much like the way that we want, and then once you have a pretty good template, then you can kind of copy like whatever it is that you're repeating over and over again, and figure out like just what's inside of that we need to actually change. Wherever we have like literal content, literal text, or literal links to images, we can go ahead and set that up with a PHP. Just like when it comes to converting a visual design to HTML, I would say going from static HTML to WordPress, a couple of things. Sometimes you make decisions along the way, along that process. Like there's times when like I have a visual designer, like, you know what, actually I think I want to do this a little bit differently. And you know, you can kind of change that as you're building out the HTML. The same thing here. Don't stress out about like, well, it has to look exactly the same. There might be different aspects that you find out along the way. Like, oh wait, in my static HTML, I was using much longer titles. And this one, because I have fake content, you have much shorter titles. Do I want it to look like that? You know, maybe want to make the text bigger. You know, maybe the client's going to have shorter titles. I don't know. So you can kind of make certain decisions like in CSS along the way. But the main thing is that your end result is as efficient and straightforward as possible. Not that the goal is not to make it look exactly like your HTML. The goal is to make this as efficient and well put together as possible. If that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah. So next week, I think next week we'll very briefly go over